Before getting started with any project inside GameSalad, you're going to want to determine what your destination is. Are you creating a game for the web, for the iPhone, the iPad, or the iPhone 4? Now, the standard resolution for the iPhone is 480 by 320. This is for earlier generations of iPhones and iPod Touches. But if we take a look at the iPhone 4, the resolution is actually 960 by 640. Now the screen size is the same, but because of the Retina display that was unveiled with the iPhone 4, it actually has 4 times the amount of pixels. So when you're designing your projects, you're actually going to want to design them at this size, the 960 by 640. And GameSalad has a really unique feature called resolution independence. And when this is checked, it means that you can take your projects that have been designed in the 960 by 640 format, and it'll resize everything down for other phones and optimize all your graphics for earlier phones and earlier iPods as well. So if an iPhone is your target, I recommend that you do the 960 by 640 format when you're designing your projects inside Photoshop or any other image editing program. And then when you decide to bring those graphics into your GameSalad project, make sure that you have resolution independence checked. Now, just a word of warning, if you're not going to design everything at the 960 by 640 format, then don't bother clicking resolution independence. Just go ahead and keep that off by default. But as I mentioned, why not make your projects accessible to the largest audience and design them all at 960 by 640, which is what this project that we're going to be talking about is designed in. Now before we jump into GameSalad and start putting together this game, I'd like to talk a little bit about the graphics, how they were put together, and how you can set them up. Now it doesn't matter whether you use Photoshop or any other image editing programs, but it's a good idea to go ahead and kind of lay out everything in front of you. You could design all your graphics separately and then just as easily put that all together inside GameSalad. But what I like to do is just kind of lay it out and see how things are looking. So if we take a look here, we start off with our home screen. And the home screen is essentially just one solid image. Now I could make this start area, because obviously it's going to be a button, a separate image, and the instructions a separate image. But for the sake of making this tutorial much easier, we're just going to make this one solid image, and then I'll show you how to make this start area and instructions area of the image actual buttons that are functional. So that's our first screen, our home screen, so to speak. If we jump over into our instructional page, you'll see that we've kind of designed a little quick instructional page here which tells the user how to play our game. We've also added a button here up at the top which takes us back to our main screen. And again, we can create a different image for this button up here, but because it's so easy inside GameSalad just to make an active area of the image a button, we'll just go ahead and leave this as one solid image that we're going to optimize. Now from our instruction screen, let's move over to our game area. Now our game area incorporates the same background, but if I open up the layers that you see here in Photoshop, you're going to see that I have several elements. And the reason I suggest designing these things all together in whatever design program you're working on is so that you can see how everything looks. If I'm going to turn on the U1 image, I get to see how that looks inside the game, or the You Lose image, or turn off and on start, and you can just kind of play with all the elements and see how they kind of all work together. The one last thing I do want to show you is how to maybe take some of these graphics and then output them in a optimized way so that you can use them. Now if your graphic is going to be something solid, for instance like this background, then just go ahead and maybe export it as a JPEG. GameSalad supports a wide range of image formats, so an optimized JPEG will be just fine. But for instance, our ball image here needs a transparent background so that when it kind of moves over everything inside the scene here, it doesn't have some sort of square background around it. So what we can do here is select the ball, and again you might be using a different photo editing program, but I'm just going to hit the command key and click on the ball layer, which is going to select it. I'll just do a command copy for that. I'll create a new document which already has the size of the ball there. And then I'll paste the ball into that new document. So let me zoom in here so you can see this a bit better. So right now I'm going to get rid of the background. Just drag that to the trash. And then you're going to notice that we have a transparent background around the ball. That way it can stay inside our scene without any sort of border around it. Now, how do we get this out of Photoshop and keep it optimized and also keep the transparency? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go File, and you can do this many different ways, but this is just kind of one of the quickest ways to get optimized images out of Photoshop for the web or games or what have you. And we'll go File, Save for Web or Device. And then we're going to switch this over to PNG. Now, earlier I mentioned if you're using a solid image that's going to be the background, you can just go ahead and set this to a JPEG and then change this quality setting right here. I'll do the background in a second so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But for right now, because we want to preserve that transparency, we're going to set this to PNG 24. And that's all you need to do. You can see that this image, this ball image, is actually 2.1K. So a very, very small file, great to work with. And then of course we can save this out. I've already saved that out, so I'll just hit cancel. And then I'm going to deselect that ball. And I'm going to go to the background. And I'll go File, Save for Web and Device. And again, because this doesn't require any sort of transparency, I'll just keep this set to JPEG. And I'm going to want to take a look at my graphics here. I can zoom in and I can play with my resolution settings. So if I take this all the way up to 100%, I can see kind of what my edges are looking like. And if I take this down to about 50, we can also see how things are looking. So somewhere around anywhere between 70 or 50 will be great. You won't really notice any sort of strange artifacts in your image, and you'll notice that your images are quite small. Again, this is the large iPhone 4 size, and this is coming in only at 50K, so we can save that out. And then that's how we get all these individual images out and ready for use inside GameSalad. So enough with the image prep. Hopefully you've done a great job designing and getting your game ready to go. If you're going to follow along with this tutorial and use these actual images, and you're watching this video somewhere other than the GameSalad website, like on YouTube or what have you, just go ahead and visit GameSalad.com to download all of the files that I'll be working with in the next couple of tutorials. So now that we have GameSalad up and running, you'll notice under the new project section here, we have a blank project that we could double click on. So I'll do that now, and then I'll go ahead and open up our project window here. So I'll just open that up, fill the screen with it, and then you can see inside this project window that we're working with, our project editor, that we have a couple different windows. We can obviously name our project up at the top, create some tags, instructions, or descriptions. So go ahead and name your project now, just so you know how to find it in the future. And we have our scenes down here at the bottom. Now before we get into any of this, as I mentioned earlier, we're actually going to be creating a game for the iPhone. And this is actually going to be in the portrait, the long direction of the iPhone. So we're going to switch this over to iPhone Portrait. We'll click OK. And as I mentioned, if you're going to design your project so that it reaches users of the new Retina display and below, you're going to want to make sure that you do that design, as I mentioned in the earlier video, at the right resolution. And then we're going to click this Enable Resolution Independence. And that's all you need to do. Once you publish this or export it from GameSalad, GameSalad will go ahead and make sure that your graphics look great both on the iPhone 4 and earlier generations of the iPhone and the iPod Touch. So as you noticed in the first video, we have a couple different segments. We have a kind of a home screen with our start and instruction screen, and then the game area. So let's just go ahead and name this first scene right here. We'll call this Home. And then down here at the bottom you'll see a little plus. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm just going to call this Instructions. And then this third one, I'll just call this Play Area. You can name this anything you want, but these are pretty much the three different scenes inside our game that we're going to be working with. So the first thing that we want to do is set up our home screen. So I'm going to double click on the home scene here. And then you'll notice that there is a tab here called Images. Let's go ahead and bring in the image that we had exported, which was our background image for our home screen. So I'll click on Images, and again there's a little plus down here at the bottom. So I'm going to go to my home screen image and then click Open. and I have it right here inside my images. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag this home image right up here to my actors. Now everything you pretty much work with here inside the scene is going to be an actor. Kind of makes sense. This is our scene and we need to put actors into our scene. So my home screen is now an actor, and I'm going to drag this over into my scene. Just drag and drop. And then you can use your arrows on your keyboard to kind of move that up or down. So I'll click on it and just kind of position that where I want to position it. Now with any digital program that you work with, you want to get into the habit of saving kind of as often as you can. You can get lost in your work, and every digital program from time to time can kind of have a bit of a hiccup. So I'm just going to make a habit of hitting Command S to save, and then now that we're starting our project, you can go ahead and save out a new project. So basically what we've done here is drag an image into our scene. Now let's say we want to preview what our game looks like. Well, you notice that there's a green arrow up here at the top that says preview. I'm going to click on that now, and then you can see this is what our game looks like. So we placed our graphic in a good center position inside the scene. So I'm just going to click this back arrow here, just like a web browser, to go back to where I was. And now we've seen how our first image looks. Now before we start connecting the start button and the instructions, let's go ahead and add our other scenes in. So I'm going to click the home icon, and again that's taking me back to kind of where these initial scenes were set up. I'm going to double click on the instructions. You'll see that we have a blank scene here now, but we do have our home image still up here in the actors and in the images. So now we want to bring in another image. This is our instructions, so I'll just click the little plus icon again, and again I'm going to look for that instructions background. That's imported. I'll drag that up as an actor, and then I'll just drag that into the instructions scene, and then if I want to see what that looks like, I can click preview, and then it looks really good. Again, I'll hit the back arrow, and then we'll do this for our final area. So again, we're going to click home again to go back to kind of this scene area, and I'm going to click on the play area. Now you notice I'm clicking the back arrow to do this, but I just want to show you that you can actually also click on this area, scenes, and choose which scene you want. So you don't have to keep coming back here. But I do want to, in these videos, kind of show you all the different ways that you can make things really simple inside GameSalad. So we'll double click on play area, and then we'll import the background of our game and follow the same process of dragging it up here into the actors. And I'm just going to drag that down into my scene, and then I'll hit preview to see how that's looking. Looks really good. So you can see we have our home, instructions, and play area all set up here. So I'll go back. So now let's say we want to go ahead and edit our home screen so that those start buttons and instruction buttons take us to the scene that we want. So now is where we jump into the really exciting part of GameSalad, and you see how easy it is to start adding functionality to these images to turn them into actually living and breathing games. So the first thing I'm going to do is switch back to my home screen, because this is the one that I'm going to be working with, and we want to make this start area and this instruction area active. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to create a new actor. Now you saw that I've already created 3 actors by simply dragging these images and then bringing them up here into the actors area, which designates them as actors. But I want to kind of create a new blank actor, and I can do that by clicking this little plus button, and you can see we have a blank actor here, actor 1, and I'm going to rename this guy Start. And what I want to do is drag this start actor down onto my scene, and I'm just going to cover up the start area of this image, and this is where we're going to be basically touching with our finger to go ahead and activate this as kind of a button. So we'll get that right over the start image, and now we need to give this actor some functionality. That's really simple to do. I'm just going to, in the actors area up here, not inside the scene, but in the actors area, I'm going to double click on start, and you're going to see that you have this empty area here. And basically what we want to do is set up a rule, and that's really the power behind GameSalad. You're going to be doing this visual programming where you say, I want you to do this if this happens, and that's kind of like a rule. So you'll see right here it says create rule, so I'm going to click on create rule, And we kind of get to set up the if and then, the cause and effect, so to speak. So the actor will receive this event if the mouse button is down. So basically that's what's saying in this rule is if the actor, meaning the start button that we just double clicked on, has a mouse button pressed down, this will happen. And we haven't designated what the this is yet. But we want to be doing this for the iPhone, so what we're going to simply switch this mouse down to is touch. You have a lot of options here. So we're just going to switch to touch. Touch is pressed. If we were doing this for a web output and creating a game for a web, we might have kept that to the mouse button. But for right now, we're working on iPhone, so we'll switch that to touch. And now next to the images tab, you'll notice that there's a behaviors tab. I'm going to open that up. And there's a lot of really cool behaviors in here that we can just simply drag and drop to give all sorts of functionality to our actors. So what we want to do is change scene. So scroll through your behaviors here and look for the change scene behavior, I should say, which is right here. I'm going to drag that into this rule. So this is really a very simple language when you think about it. We've set up a rule that says when you touch this actor, basically go to the next scene. But we want to actually choose which scene we want to go to. And again, that's why naming is really important when you're working on your projects. So I'm going to switch from the start button is going to go obviously to the play area. And that's it. You've already set up a functional app inside GameSalad. Now granted, the app only goes from one screen to the next, but that's all there is to creating applications. Just setting up simple rules. So let's go ahead and go back and test this out. So I'm going to click preview and see what happens when I click on this white area. It takes us to the play area. Now that white area isn't very attractive, so what we're going to do is again double click on the start actor that we created, and you can see that you have a few options here. And one of those options is graphics. I'm going to open that up, and inside graphics we have this checkbox visibility. I'm going to uncheck that. So basically our actor is now invisible. He's still there, but he's invisible. So if I go back, you can see that we don't see that white box anymore. But if I click in the scene, there's the box. So we can still move that around, stretch it out, and work with it. So now if I hit preview, you can see that we have our beautiful start button that we took so much time to design earlier, but without that ugly white box. And if I click start, it'll take us straight to the play area. So let's go back again. And let's go ahead and create another actor for the instructions. So again, I'll click the plus button here to create a new actor. I'll call this instructions. And just like I did with the start button, I'm going to drag this down into my scene over the instructions area, and I'm just going to click on these little circles to size everything the way that I want. You can click inside this box to move it around, and you can click this little handle to actually rotate it the way that you want to rotate it. So basically, just like we did with the start button, I'm going to double click on the instructions actor so that we can kind of add some behaviors to it. And we're going to add the same rule. So we're going to create a new rule, which is essentially going to say when this actor receives a touch is pressed, we want to change the scene. So I'll again take this change scene action, I'll drag that into this rule, and then I'll choose the scene I want to change to. So this one is actually going to go to the instructions screen. And I'll also click on the graphics area and then make this invisible as well. So you can see it's not showing up there. But if we preview this, I can click instructions and it goes straight to the instructions window. So far we have everything set up except for here when we're in the instructions window and we're doing this simulated preview of the game. How do we get back to the home screen? And that's this little home icon up here in the top left hand corner that we're going to set up. So we'll go ahead and hit back. And we want to change to the instructions scene. So all we need to do is click on our little scenes tab up here and switch over to instructions. And then we're going to do the same exact thing. We'll create a new actor. I'll name this actor something that I can pay attention to. So I'm going to say home button so I don't get it confused with like a home screen or something like that. And I'm going to drag this guy down into the instructions scene and resize him properly. And then I can double click on that home button and then repeat the process. So create a rule, and this rule is essentially going to say when we press that area, we are going to change the scene. And the scene we want to go to is obviously home. So I can just go back here now and then simply hit preview, click that button, takes me back home, click start, takes me to the play area. I can click this little circle with an arrow which will reset everything. And let's just go back and make sure the visibility of our home button is also turned off. So again, we'll double click on it. We'll click on graphics and then we'll uncheck visibility. I'm going to switch back to my home scene and then one more time preview this. So we have a start instructions. I'll click on instructions, click on the home icon, click on start, and then we're ready to play our game once we get it set up. So that took just a few minutes because I wanted to really explain everything to you guys, but you can see how simple it is. Just with a few simple rules and some behaviors, we've already set up a functional app. Now, if you just wanted to create a photo app where you can switch between photos, you already have all the know-how in the world to do that. But we're going to take in the next several videos several steps further, and we're going to create a really exciting functional classic arcade game. And once you guys are done with that, you're going to really understand how simple and powerful it is to use GameSalad. Now, while we're working on this, I want to point out one thing. It's not so much the game we're creating, but it's what you learn along the way. And I want to point out that when you do learn these behaviors and simple rules that we're going to be setting up, the amount of games that you can create is pretty much endless, because you'll see how you can kind of tweak and modify these rules and behaviors to pretty much get GameSalad to do whatever you want and what's in your imagination. So now that we've set up our 3 different scenes that we're going to be working with inside this game, we want to start adding our actors to the play area. So I'm going to switch over to that scene, which is our play area scene, and I'm going to click on this image tab because we're going to bring in a few more images that we're going to use. So again, just to make this a little bit simplified, I'm just dragging in images as we need. So we'll go back to our folder with all of our images. And what I want to bring in now is actually the ball. We're going to bring in the platform that the ball bounces off of. And that's it for right now. I'll click open. We can drag both of these up into our actors area. I'm just going to click and drag and bring the platform down in this area. Doesn't matter exactly where you drop it right now because we're going to be adjusting that with some constraints and rules in a little bit. And we'll take the ball and also drag that down into this area. So now that we have that set up, we want to start adding in the coins that this ball is essentially going to be bouncing off and catching. And to do that, we're actually going to import a whole sequence of images because this is going to be an animated image that we're working with. So I'll click the plus button again, and I have a folder in here with coin animation. We have about 18 frames, and I'll click open. And you can see these coins now added into our images. Now, we're not just going to drag all of these into our scene here. What we need to do is create a new actor. So I'll click the plus button here in the actors tab, and we're going to call this coin. And what we want to do is double click on the coin actor, because if we were to actually just drag this in right now, you'd see we'd get a white box. We don't want that. So I'm going to double click on the coin actor, and we're going to add a behavior to this. Now, you've seen in the first couple of videos that we were actually adding rules and then behaviors to that rule. Now, the only time you want to add a rule and then a behavior is when you need something to kind of react to something. For instance, if I touch the screen of my iPod or if I use the tilt of my iPhone, we want it to affect or change an attribute. In this case, we want this behavior or attribute to be applied the entire time, so we don't need to create a rule for this. I'll switch over to behaviors, and what we're going to choose is the animate behavior. So we didn't apply a rule, so it's just applied all the time. We're going to switch over to images, and then I'm going to select my first coin image, hold the shift key, and then select my last coin image, so I have all of those images selected, and I'm going to click and drag this into the animate area. So you can see that all of these images in order have been lined up in this animate behavior. You can see some settings below this, the speed, which is 10 frames per second, whether it's looping or whether you restore the actor's image when done. Now don't worry about any of this. You can leave all of this as is by default. And I'll just give you kind of a heads up on how I created this rotating coin image. I used a 3D program to create a 3D coin, and I just did a quick output of this coin spinning around once 360 degrees. And that's all there is to creating really cool 3D graphics that you can then add to your GameSalad projects. So if we go back here and we drag this white box in here again, we just get a white box, but if I hit preview, you're going to notice that we get that coin spinning around. But there's two things I want to alter here. One, the coin looks a little bit fuzzy in resolution, and that's because the original coin image is 48 by 48 pixels, but when you create a kind of a blank actor here, you're actually going to be creating an actor at 100 by 100 pixels. So what we want to do is fix that. I'm going to double click on the coin, and we're going to go to size, and you can see that we have this width and height 100 by 100. As I mentioned, that original image is actually just 48 by 48. So we'll change that. And just so we're not looking at an ugly white box here, let's just drag one of our coin images on top of that actor here. So I'll take the first frame and just drop that there. That way here in the actors area and in our scene we can see a nice coin instead of that white box. That way when we position everything we can see how it's actually going to look. So all I'm going to do right now is reposition this coin, and we'll just add a few. Now when you create it, you can create as many coins as you want or as few as you want, but what I'm going to do is actually hold the Alt key. You can continue dragging the actor from over here, but something that's actually a little bit faster is hold down the Alt key, click on the actor, and then drag out just a duplicate of that actor, and then you can do this a few more times. Just by holding Alt, click and drag, and you have a brand new actor inside your scene. And I'll just put a second row down here. Great. So if we preview this now, you're going to see that we have all of our coins rotating there inside our scene. So now that we have our scene set up with all our actors, what we want to do in this video is start developing the touch control for the platform. Essentially, when we develop this iPhone game, you want to be able to kind of touch right underneath this platform that you see here and be able to slide it back and forth. The first step that we're going to do is we're going to apply a constraint in the Y direction, so kind of up and down, where we want this paddle constrained as far as its height off the ground here. To do this, we're going to double click on the platform, and then we're not going to create a rule for this because, again, as I pointed out in the last video, a rule is only when something is kind of dependent on something, a touch or some other value or input. Right now all we want to do is make sure that this behavior is applied all the time. So we'll click on our behaviors again, and we're going to find the constrain attribute. So we'll click and drag constrain attribute here into the platform, and then we're going to click on this little set of dots here, which is going to open up a menu, our attribute browser, and what we want to do is click on the name of what we're working with, so the platform, and we want to constrain its position, so I'll select position, and we want to constrain it in the Y axis, so I'll double click on Y. So basically, just to kind of reiterate what I just did, we selected the platform, we selected the platform's position, and then we chose, are we going to focus on up and down or left and right? So obviously we're focusing on up and down with Y. So what do we want to constrain this to? And this has to do with kind of pixel values of our screen. So for instance, if I were to just type in the number 100, and I'll hit return on that, we can jump back here so we can see where we placed it originally, and this is just where we dropped it into our scene. But if I hit preview, look where the paddle ends up. You can see it's much higher. So this is the value that we just set, the 100 value. So we're constraining it in that position. So that's a little too high, so let's go back. We're going to double click on the platform again. And this time I'll type in something like 50 and then do a preview. And that's a little bit too low, so somewhere between 50 and 100, which 75 should work just fine. I'm going to switch back to our play area scene and preview that, and that looks perfect right at 75. Now that our platform's set up and in the right position, what we want to do is start creating the controls that actually allow us to touch the screen of our iPhone or iPod and control that paddle or that platform and move it back and forth. So the way that we'll do this is, let's first set up the area that we actually want our finger to control this platform with. So again, we'll create a new actor, and I'm just going to call this new actor touch area. And I'll drag that down into my scene. And pretty much just right below this platform is where we want to be able to use our finger to slide this platform back and forth. So pretty much this area will work just fine. Just like we did with the other buttons and areas, we're going to double click on the touch area, and I'm going to change the visibility. So I'll click on the drop down for graphics and uncheck visibility. And you can see that we still have that touch area, but it's invisible. So we can just slide our finger across this area and then control the platform. Next, we're going to want to create a custom attribute that is going to drive this touch area so that we can control the paddle with it. So we're going to click on this attributes tab right here next to actors, and you'll see that there's a few default attributes in here, but we're going to click the plus button and create a new attribute. Now you can see that you have a few options here, and in this tutorial and other tutorials I'll kind of go through these. I'm not going to explain each one now just for time, but basically what you want to do right now is click on Reel, and as we kind of start applying individual new custom attributes, you'll start to understand what these mean much more than me just explaining them now. So we'll click on Reel and click Choose, and you can see that we have a new attribute. So what I'm going to do is just call this, so we don't confuse it with our touch area, I will just call this slider attribute. And then you can see that we can add a default value here, which is currently set to 0, and the default value that I want you to type in now is 160. And the reason I chose 160, and again all of this will become much clearer as we start to connect everything, is because half of our scene area right here is 160 pixels. So right in the center is 160, which is where we want kind of everything to start off when we start our game. We don't want our platform over to the left or over to the right. So what we want to do now is connect the touch area with this new slider attribute that we just created. So I'm going to click on my Actors tab and then double click on the touch area. And we're going to apply a new rule here. So I'll click Create Rule, and again we're going to use the constrain behavior or constrain attribute. But before I do that, I want to change this mouse button over to touch. Again, remember we're developing this for an iPhone, so we're always going to want to switch to that touch. So we'll choose the constrain attribute, drag that into this rule. And what we want to do right now is locate that new attribute that we just created. And you can find those by clicking on the dotted line here, clicking on Game, and then you'll find your attributes or your custom attributes right here. So we'll just click on Slider Attribute, and we can double click on that. And what we want to do is connect this. So we're going to click on this E for the expression editor. We'll click on this down arrow. We're going to click Devices, Touches, One Touch, and we're going to be focusing on the X-axis. And then double click on that and then click your check mark. So for those of you that are new to GameSalad, let me just explain this one more time. Basically what we did is we took this slider attribute and we connected it to the touch on the iPhone or the iPod Touch that we're developing for. So I'll do that one more time really quickly. Inside our games is our slider attribute, so we'll double click on that, and we want to connect that to, if I click on this down arrow, to devices, a single touch, and of course the touch that's going to be moving back and forth in the X-axis. We can double click on that and then click our check mark. Now the same way that we just took that slider area or that touch area and connected it to the slider attribute, we want to do the same type of connection with the platform. So I'm going to click back here so that we can click on our platform actor, open that up, and we're going to create another constrain attribute here. So we'll go constrain attribute, we'll drag that into this area, we're going to click on the dotted line, and we're going to choose platform, which is the name of the actor we're working with. and we're going to do position, and then we're going to do X. And what we want to constrain that to is, again, inside our expression editor here, we're going to click on this down arrow. We're going to click on game, slider attribute, double click on that, and then click your check mark. So if we go back here and now preview everything, you can see if I click in this area, I can now move this platform back and forth. And obviously a click will respond just fine because we're not testing on an iPhone at this moment. We're just kind of testing it inside the preview area. So this click and drag is acting as my finger touching an iPod or an iPhone screen back and forth. Now that we have control over the platform, what we want to do is create a button that will launch the ball. So we'll go back to our images. I'll click the plus icon one more time, and I'll click on the start PNG to bring that in. I'll drag that up into my actors, and I'm going to drag that down into my scene and just put it right above the ball area. Next, what we're going to want to do is create another new attribute, like the way we created the attribute for the slide area, to now control launching the ball when we click this start button. So again, I'll click on attributes. We'll click the plus icon to add a new one, and this time we're going to use a boolean. I'll click choose, and then we'll just name this launch ball. And we don't need to turn on this default value at all. What we'll want to do now is add that launch ball attribute that we just created to the start actor. So what I'm going to do is double click on the start actor. Now this is one of the parts in the tutorial where what we do later on kind of is affected by what we do here. So what we do here doesn't really actually have any effect on the game yet. So it might not make exact sense now, but I don't want you to get nervous. Just follow along and plug in the same attributes I do. And once we get a few more things connected down the road, all of this will make perfect sense. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new rule here in the start actor. And of course we're going to switch this over to touch. And we're going to click this plus icon to append a new condition here. And we're going to switch this from actor receives event over to attribute. And we'll click on the dotted line here to choose game, and then the launch ball attribute that we created. And we'll switch this over to false. So now what we want to do is add two change attributes to this rule. So our first change attribute, we'll click on the dotted line. Again, click on game, launch ball, double click on that, and we're going to set this to true. So where it says 2, I will just type in the word true, and then we'll add our second change attribute by dragging that up into the rule. And this time we want to affect whether the start button is visible or not. So to do that, we're going to click on the dotted line, select the start actor itself. We're going to go down to color and double click on alpha. And what we want to set the alpha to is the number 0. So this basically makes the start fully transparent. So just one more rule to set up here. We'll create a rule. We'll again switch this actor receives event down to attribute. We're going to click on the dotted line, click on game, launch ball. We want to switch this over to false. And again, one more time, we're going to drag up the change attribute to this second rule that we've created. And again, we want to change the transparency of the start button. So up here you saw that I basically turned the transparency off or made it transparent so that you don't see the start button. And what we want to do down here is again click on the start actor, click on color, double click on alpha, and we're going to set this to 1. And that's all there is for setting up here. And again, as I pointed out, this will make a ton of sense later on. But some of the easiest parts to understand in this language that we've just set up here is essentially that when we touch the start button, we're going to turn its alpha to 0. And we're also going to bring it back by turning its alpha to 1. So now that we have all of that set up, let's jump over to the ball actor where this game launch ball attribute, true or false, is going to make a lot more sense. So I'm just going to click back here. And I'm going to double click on the ball, and we're going to add a new rule here. So we'll create a rule, And instead of using an event like a touch or a mouse click, we're going to switch this again over to attribute, because again we're going to be selecting that launch ball attribute by clicking on the dotted line, game launch ball, and we'll just keep this to true. And then what attribute or behavior are we going to affect when game launch ball is true? And that, in this case, because we're working with the ball, will be the change velocity action. So I'm just going to click on that and drag that up to the rule. Now you can see that the speed is set to default of 300 and our direction is set to 0. Now there's a wheel over here on the right side which we can kind of click and drag and move that around in different degrees and move it to 90 degrees if we want the ball to launch straight up. Now you can give this a set value, like for instance 90 degrees if you do want the ball launching straight up. But in this case, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Instead of having our ball launch in one direction, let's click on the expression editor. And in this video tutorial, you're really just getting a small taste of what the expression editor can do. But it's really amazing once you get into it and start learning a little bit more about it, the amount of control you can have over pretty much anything. So I'll click on the little E here to open up the expression editor. And this second arrow pointing down here in the middle, I'm going to click on that and I'm going to choose random. So you see we have an expression inputted here which says random min max, which is the minimum and the maximum degrees that we're going to be working with. So let's say that we want to launch our ball, again 90 is straight up, so let's say from a range of 120 over to 60 degrees. So this is the range that our ball is going to launch in, and I'll just click this check mark here. So if I switch over to the player area scene and we preview that, you can see now if we click the start button, that's going to go ahead and launch our ball into outer space here. We can reset that and click start again. And you'll see that every single time you click on this, it kind of gets a little bit more random and it changes direction slightly. Now we don't want our ball shooting off into outer space like this, so we're going to have to set up some boundary areas. So I'm going to back up, and what we want to do is create a brand new actor. So we'll click on the plus here in the actors section, and I'm just going to call this actor wall. I'm going to drag this into my scene, and I'm just going to set these up just outside the viewable area. And if you didn't know this trick already, what you can do is hold the control key and then on your touchpad or your mouse slide forward, and that's going to zoom directly into this small area so you can see exactly what you're working with. So I'll do that right now. Hold down control, and then I'm using a laptop, so I'm just going to click with my two fingers and push forward, and that's going to zoom me in. And then holding control and taking two fingers and sliding back on the touchpad will zoom me out. So I'll continue setting up my wall here. And again, I can hold the Alt key and click on this and drag it over. Set it up for the other side. And then we're going to want to set one up here for the top. And then I can preview this just to make sure that these walls aren't showing up inside the scene. And I can see a little bit of the top wall showing up. So I'm going to hit the back arrow, click on that, and then just use the arrows on my keyboard to kind of move that up a little bit, and then preview that one more time. So now that we have the walls in place, what we're going to want to do is set up some collision attributes for the ball and some physics for everything that the ball is going to be interacting with. So the first thing that we're going to do is add some collide behaviors to the ball, but before we do that, let's determine what the ball is actually going to be coming in contact with. Well, the ball will be coming in contact with the walls. It's going to be coming in contact with this platform down here, and it's also going to be coming in contact with the coins. Now you have to decide which items or which actors in the scene are going to be movable or not movable. Obviously the ball is going to be movable because it's going to be bouncing around our scene, but the wall, the coins, and the platform, even though we're controlling it with our fingers, we don't want it to be reacted in some sort of physical way by the ball impacting it. So let's move back here and let's jump over to the ball. and I'm going to add our first collision attribute. Now again, we're not going to create a rule with this, because when we create a rule, what we want a rule to do is determine some sort of action that then affects something else, like touch this, then do that. For collide, we want to make sure that this is always being applied to the ball, so we don't need to create a rule. So I'll simply click on the collide behavior and drag that over here into the ball. And then we're going to choose what we want the ball to collide with. So you can see you have a list of all your actors here that are currently in the scene. I'm going to click on wall, and our ball is going to be colliding with our walls. So let's preview that and see what that looks like. I'll click start, and you can see the ball hits the walls and then bounces off of them. But you can also see something very interesting starting to happen. You can see those walls are starting to float around in outer space. They're starting to rotate, and they're reacting to the ball physically hitting it. The momentum of the ball is then transferred into those walls as they float around. So what we want to do is change some physical attributes about those walls so that they're not flying around in space. So we'll jump back into the ball, or into the wall actor by double clicking on it. And you'll notice that there is a arrow here and a pull down called physics. If we open that up, there's just a few things that we want to change here. We want to change movable, so we're going to turn that off, and we're also going to turn on fixed rotation. So we don't want this actor to move, and we don't want this actor to rotate. So if I were to just do a quick preview of that scene again, now that I've checked movable off and fixed rotation on, you can see that the ball is not going to bounce against those walls, or it's going to bounce against the walls, but it's not going to affect the walls, and we're not going to see the walls rotating or spinning out of place anymore. So we'll jump back into our ball actor. And what else do we want the ball to collide with? Well, I'll drag another collide behavior in here. And we also want the ball to collide with the platform. And then we'll do this one more time. We'll drag another collide behavior in here, and we want the ball to collide with the coins. Let's preview that. Hit start. And you can see our ball is reacting. The walls aren't moving, but our coins are flying off in outer space. And also something else interesting is happening. You notice that the ball is slowing down. And that's because we have a lot of friction in the scene, and that's also under the physics tab. So just to finalize things up here, we want to fix what's going on with the coins. And if it hit our platform at the bottom, you'd notice that that would rotate off into space. So we're going to make everything not movable, fix the rotation on everything, and we're going to turn off the friction on everything as well, so that the ball doesn't slow down as it's moving around the scene. It just continues to smoothly spin around the scene. So let's jump back, and that's just a few quick fixes. Let's start with our coin actor. We'll double click on that. We'll open up its physics tab, and again we want to make sure that this is not movable, so I'll uncheck that. We want to make sure it has a fixed rotation, and you'll notice that there's a friction option here set to 3. We're going to set this to 0 for everything. Very, very important that you remember to set that for all the collidable actors in your scene. Set it down to 0, including for the ball. Let's jump back. We have the coin set up properly. The wall, let's jump back into our wall, because we set up its fixed rotation and making it non-movable, but we forgot to go ahead and take its friction down to 0. Our platform, we're going to open up its physics tab, take its friction down to 0. We're going to make sure that it has a fixed rotation and it's non-movable. And let's just jump into the ball real quick, open its physics up. And of course we want the ball movable, but you notice that if you look here in the image of the ball, there's a light source. You can see a specular hit from light here at the top of the ball. We don't want the ball to rotate, because that's going to look very strange that the light source is rotating around the ball. So even though we'll keep the ball movable, we're going to make sure it has a fixed rotation. And we're also going to take its friction down to 0. And I'm just going to double check. Yep, all of that looks great. So now if we look at our scene, all the friction is down to 0. Everything is set to fixed rotation, and the only thing that's set to movable is the ball itself. So if we preview this and click the start button, and I move my paddle around, I should be able to keep this ball suspended in the air as it bounces around against the walls and all the coins that we set up. So as you may have noticed, we actually didn't set up a wall below the platform area here. So if I just let that ball fall down, it kind of just disappears into outer space and it never comes back. So what we want to do is create an actor below that visible area that will interact with the ball and allow us to reset the ball back into its original starting position. So to do this, we want to create an actor, and we're going to call this actor reset ball. So just again click on the plus icon here and name this. And I'm going to switch its color just so I don't get confused with these white wall areas. So I'll just double click on that actor, and you can click on this color square here to open up a color swatch. And now we're ready to drag this, let me make sure I name that right, reset ball actor down into our scene. I'm just going to size that so it takes up this whole bottom area, but I don't actually see it inside my scene. So this is just kind of an empty actor sitting here, and now we want to set up some rules and behaviors to get this ball to interact with this reset ball actor that we just created. So let's jump into the ball. And before I add any new rules or behaviors here, I do want to show you one way of cleaning up this area. As we work, this is going to get busier and busier. So what we can do is hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to click on all of these collides, and then click this button up here that says Create Group. It's going to group them all together. That way I can just name this group Collide, and then we can just close this down so that we don't have to see all of that. So let's create a new rule at this point. So what we want to do is have this rule interact with the ball overlapping or colliding with that reset ball actor. So here where it says mouse button, I'm going to switch that to overlap or collides. And we're going to choose the actor that we want to have this effect take place with. So that's going to be the reset ball area. And then what attribute do we want to change when the ball overlap and collides with this reset ball area? You can pretty much add any attribute, but we're going to do a change attribute. And we're going to go ahead and select the ball, its position, and its X position. So I'll double click on that. So essentially what we're saying here is when the ball overlaps and collides with the reset ball actor, we're going to change its X position to something. But before we figure out that something, let's go ahead and add another change attribute and do the exact same thing for the Y position. So again, we're going to click on the dotted line, we're going to click on ball, click on position, and then double click on Y. So we're going to change two attributes right now. When the ball overlap and collides with the reset ball actor we created, we're going to change the X and Y position. The only thing is we have no idea right now what those X and Y positions are. So to determine that, we're going to move back here. So I'll click my back arrow, and I'm going to double click on the ball in the scene. Now make sure that you're not double clicking on things in the scene and editing them that way. Good rule of thumb is just edit the actors by double clicking on them here. So, but for this case, we do want to double click on the ball, and we're going to see this pull down here, which is position, and we can see that this is about 158 by 107. So our X is 158 and our Y is 107. So let's go ahead and plug those in. So back to the ball actor, and for X we're going to type in 158, and for Y we're going to type in 107. So let's test that out and see what happens when our ball interacts with the reset ball actor that we created. So we'll click Start, and then we'll let the ball fall down, and you'll see something very interesting is happening. It's resetting the ball, but the ball still has its current velocity that we created earlier. So how do we get rid of that velocity? And if you just think for a moment, I'm sure you can understand what rule we need to then apply to the ball that will now basically eliminate the current velocity that we have to it. So we'll move back, we'll jump back into the ball actor, And again, when the ball overlaps and collides with the reset ball area, we've reset its position, but let's do one more attribute here, and that's going to be a change velocity. So we'll drag that into the rule as well. And our speed is set to 300, so let's just set that to 0 and then see what happens now. We'll let our ball fall down, and it resets. Its velocity is set to 0, and we have our ball back in the start position. But the only thing that we're missing now is the start button, so we need to bring back the start button so we can click it again and launch our ball one more time. And that's easy enough to do. We'll just need to add one more attribute to our ball. So again, I'll double click on the ball actor to jump back in here. And what we want to do is add a change attribute to this current overlap and collides rule. So we're going to click on this dotted line here. We'll again click on game, and we're going to choose that launch ball attribute that we created. And we're going to type in the word false here. So again, that brings us full circle with understanding what we've done with the true and false for that launch ball attribute that we've created, which is also controlling the visibility of the start button. So let's go ahead and preview this. And you can see if I click start, our ball is launched. And if we let the ball fall into that reset area, you can see our start button comes back and our ball is reset. So now that we have everything bouncing around in the scene the way that we like, and our ball is resetting to our start position, let's go ahead and make it so that the ball actually destroys the coin actor when it overlaps and collides with it. So we'll double click on our coin actor, and we're going to create a new rule. And in this new rule, again, we're going to switch this mouse button over to overlaps and collides. And the actor we want to choose is, of course, the ball. So again, we've set up a rule that says when the coin actor overlaps and collides with the ball, what happens? And in this case, we want to choose destroy. And that's all there is to that. So if we preview this, you can see that when the ball comes in contact with those coins, it removes it from our scene. At this point, we pretty much have everything set up for our complete game. We have the ball bouncing around, we have control over our paddle, the ball destroys the coins when it comes in contact, and of course when our ball goes below the paddle, we have it reset. But what we're missing at this point is lives. We want to set it up so that the ball only has 3 lives, so you can actually only miss the ball about 3 times before the game ends. And also we want to be able to win the game somehow, so when all the coins have disappeared, we've won the game. So first things we'll do is set up the lives for the ball. And again, we're going to be creating a new attribute for this, so I'll simply click on attribute, and we'll click the plus icon to create a new attribute, and this again will be an integer. Click choose. And we're going to call this attribute lives. And the default that we're going to set for this attribute in this case is 3. And now that we have that lives attribute set up, we want to plug it into one of our actors. So obviously when the ball collides with the reset ball area that we have down here in red, we want to remove one of the lives. So we'll move over to the reset ball actor. We're going to create a new rule, and we're going to switch this again to overlaps and collides. So when this reset ball actor overlaps and collides with the ball itself, what we want to do is change an attribute, the attribute that we just created. So we'll click on our change attribute down here in our behaviors and drag that up to this rule. And we're going to select game and this new lives attribute that we just created. So double click on that. And basically all you need to do is click on your expression editor over here. And again, we're going to choose game, double click on lives, and type in -1 and click the check mark. So the attribute that we want to change is the game lives attribute, and what we want to change it to is the game lives attribute -1. So if you remember, we set a default value of 3. So that means that every time the ball collides with this reset ball area, it's going to change the game lives attribute to -1 of our default value. So at this point, if we were to preview the game, we're actually subtracting lives from that game lives attribute if the ball falls below the paddle area. So we've just lost 1 life, and if I do this again, we've now lost 2 lives. But we need some sort of visual way of seeing how many lives we have and how many are taken away. So to do that, let's go ahead and move over to our ball actor, and what we're going to do is simply duplicate it. So I'll click on that, hold the Alt key, and click and drag the ball actor again into this area so I have a duplicate of it. And we can rename this something like lives image. And we can place this pretty much anywhere inside our scene where we want to see these lives duplicated. So I'll drag this down into our scene here. And I'll make sure to double click on this lives image to remove kind of all the attributes, because when we duplicated it, we didn't just duplicate the actor's image, but of course all of the rules and behaviors that we added in as well. So we just want to get rid of all of these. So it's pretty much just an image inside of our scene. And we do want to apply one behavior, but before I do that, look what happens if I preview my scene here. You can see that we have that image down there, and it's not really going to do anything because we don't have any behaviors or rules applied to it. But we do want to have this kind of correspond with the amount of lives that we have. So right now we have 3 lives, but we only see 1 image. So to change that, what we want to do is add our first behavior to this lives image, and that is the replicate behavior. And with replicate added, you can see we have a few options here. We have replicate direction, and I'm not going to change that. I'll leave it to the default of 0. And we have number of copies set to 5 and spacing set to 50. So if I were to just preview this now, you can see inside our scene that that lives image has been replicated 5 times with a spacing of 50. So let's go ahead and adjust this a little bit. The first thing that I want to do is kind of tune down the spacing a little bit. We'll set that to something like 25. And we don't want just static copies of this, like for instance the number 3, because if we were to just keep a static number like that and I were to play this game, you could see that when the ball falls down, we're actually changing the lives attribute, but it's not actually affecting the ball image that we've duplicated down here and renamed as far as lives image. So let's figure out how to plug in that lives attribute into the replicate behavior. And I'm sure if you think about it, it's actually very simple on how we can do this. Let's jump back here, and instead of just having a static number of 3, let's again click on our expression editor and then plug in that lives attribute. So again, we'll click on game, where we can find our attributes. We'll click on lives, double click on that, and then click the check mark. And then now you'll notice if I hit the preview button, we have 3 lives in our scene. But when the ball falls below, you can see that one of those lives is subtracted until we move to our last live there. So the lives are working perfectly, and now what we need to do is make sure that when we run out of all 3 of our lives, that something significant happens, like the game ends. So let's go ahead and set that up now. So what we'll want to do is bring in the image that we want to display when a player loses the game. So I'll click on this plus icon here under the Images tab, and I'll import the You Lose PNG. I'll drag that up to my actor area here. And I'm not going to drag this into my scene area because what we want to do is spawn it through specific behaviors. And you'll want to apply the spawn behavior pretty much to an actor that you already have inside your scene. So what I like to do is just apply it to an actor that's really not doing much, which is our background actor. It's already in our scene and it is an actor. And we can actually apply all sorts of behaviors to kind of a inanimate actor like this. So I'll double click on background and I'm going to create a new rule. And I'm going to switch this rule over to attribute. And of course, the attribute that we want to plug into the background is that lives attribute that we created. So again, I'll click on game and then double click on lives. And you can see that because we switch this to attribute, we can switch this to equals to, less than, greater than, but we're going to keep this equals to 0, which pretty much is saying that this rule is when the game lives attribute is equal to 0, what do we want to do at this point? And as I mentioned earlier, we want to spawn the you lose actor. So we will go ahead and select our spawn actor and drag that up into this rule. And then of course we'll have to choose the correct actor here. So we'll choose the you lose actor. And you're going to have to play with your X and Y, but because I've done this before, I know I will type in 160 by 210 for this specific actor, and then we can preview this and see what happens when we lose all 3 of our lives now. So there's our actor, and it showed up way up here in the corner. And the reason for that is because I actually forgot to switch one attribute. You notice here where it says position 160 and 210, this is relative to actor. So what I want to do is actually switch this over to relative to scene. And it's actually kind of good that I made that mistake here on video, because when you start seeing these attributes or these X and Y positions jump all over the place, and you're not exactly sure why, make sure you check to see whether you have it relative to the actor or relative to the scene. So let's try that one more time. And there you go. We have it showing up exactly where we want. But the only thing is that we still have the ball, the paddle, and the start button inside our scene. And maybe we want to remove all of that so it's not so cluttered and we can just see the you lose image. So we're going to continue connecting this lives attribute to things we've created, actors we've created, and then start destroying some of these actors when our lives get down to 0. So the first actor we'll destroy is the ball. So we'll jump back over to the ball actor. Double click on the ball. You can fold up these rules if you want to kind of clean up this space a little bit. And again, we'll create a new rule really similar to the rule that we just created. So create a rule. We're going to switch this over to attribute. And of course, the attribute that we're going to want to work with again is that lives attribute. So click on game and then double click on lives. And again, we'll just keep this equals to 0. So when our lives equal 0, what do we want to happen? So we're going to go down to the destroy behavior, and we will basically destroy this actor. So let's apply the same thing to the start button. We'll jump back to that start actor, double click on it. I'll just fold up some of these rules. We'll create a new rule, switch this over to attribute, and of course we're using our lives attribute, equals 0, and then again we want to destroy. So that was very simple. We have this lives attribute that we've created. We can decide whether we want to choose a number equal to or less than, but in this case we want to choose equals 0, and we want to destroy both our ball and our start actor. So let's preview that and see what happens. So that was our last live. We get our you lose image showing up, and we've now removed the ball and the start image from the scene. So now that we have this you lose image showing up properly at the end of the game, let's go ahead and turn it into a button that actually does something and will take us back to the main menu. So we'll jump back into that actor. double click on the you lose actor. And we want to actually change this and turn it into a button. So we'll click create rule, and we'll switch this over to touch, so that when you basically touch this actor, what do you want to do with this? And we could change the scene, but if we change the scene, then as all of our coins that we've kind of destroyed or haven't destroyed will remain there. So because this is an actual you lose portion of the game, we want to just reset the whole game. So let's go down to the reset game behavior and drag that up here. So essentially when we touch this actor, we're going to reset the entire game. So let's preview that one more time to see how that works. We'll get rid of all 3 of our lives here and have you lose show up. And then when we touch the you lose actor, it resets the whole game, and then we can start over. So enough with this losing. Let's go ahead and set things up for when we actually destroy all the coins with the ball and win the game. So you saw how by creating the lives attribute earlier, we were able to control many different things inside the game by using that attribute to our advantage. So what we want to do now is create an attribute which essentially keeps track of the amount of coins that we have inside our scene. So I'll jump back here for a bit, and we're going to again click on attributes, click the plus icon, and just like our lives attribute, we're going to create an integer. Choose that, and let's call this coin count. And for the default value, you want to set up the default value as the number of coins that you currently have inside your scene. So this scene has 9 coins in it, so for my default I'll just type in the number 9. And as we plugged in the lives attribute to control and affect things in our game, we want to do the same thing now with our coins attribute that we just created. So basically every single time a coin is removed from the scene in the game, we want to subtract from this coin count of 9, which we set up for our default. So if we think about it, where are our coins being destroyed? Where did we apply that behavior? Well, that was within the coin itself. So let's go back to the coin actor by double clicking on it. And you can see that we set up this rule earlier, which basically says when the coin overlaps or collides with the ball, we're going to destroy that coin. So we want to add a change attribute to this overlap rule that we set up. So we'll just simply find our change attribute behavior and drag that up into this overlap rule. And the attribute that we want to change is the game attribute and the coin count one that we just created. And what do we want to change this to? So we're going to click on our expression editor here and then click on this down arrow. Again, we're going to click on game and choose that coin count attribute. And we're going to type in the number -1 again. So every time the coin is pretty much destroyed, we're going to subtract 1 from that default value of 9 that I set up. I'll click the check mark, and then we're ready to go. So if you remember earlier, when our lives reached 0, we spawned the you lose actor. So basically what we're going to do now is when our coin count reaches 0, we're going to spawn a U1 actor. So I'll just jump back here a little bit, and then we're going to click again on our images tab and import a U1 PNG. So I'll click the plus icon, click U1 PNG, and then open that up. I'll drag that into my actors. Now before we applied all of this to the background, so we're going to jump back into the background actor, which again just kind of in this case serves as a good container to apply some rules to that will affect our game. So we'll create a new rule, and again we're going to switch this over to an attribute because we want to find that coin count attribute that we created, which is under game and then of course coin count. And we want to have this set to 0. So what happens when our coin count reaches 0? Well, again, just like our lives and the you lose, we want to switch over to the spawn actor attribute. And we're going to switch this to the U1 actor. And again, we want to put in some values as far as X and Y. And because I created this scene earlier, I know that for this specific actor, I'm going to use 160 by 300, and you'll have to kind of play around with that if you have different images. And I'm going to have this relative to the scene. So let's see what happens now when all of our coins basically disappear. So we'll preview that. Start the game. I'll try to do a good job at getting all of the coins to disappear from our scene fairly quickly. And you can see that we have the U1 actor showing up inside our scene. But the ball's still going, and the start button and ball is resetting, and pretty much we have our U1 actor, but it's not affecting our start and our ball. So just like we did with the U lose, we want to set things up so that both the start and the ball get destroyed when the game is over. So we'll switch over to the ball actor. Double click on that actor. And you can see that we set up this rule earlier that basically said if game lives equals 0, then destroy this ball. And we want to set up a new rule, which is similar to that one. So we'll create a rule. We'll switch this again over to attribute. But of course the attribute we're looking for this time is the coin count. And when that's equal to 0, then we also want to destroy this actor. So again, we'll find the destroy actor behavior and drag that in here. And we'll do the same with the start button. Double click on that. Create a rule. Switch this over to an attribute. The attribute we will choose will be our coin count attribute. When that's equal to 0, let's go ahead and destroy this actor as well. So just as we took the U lose actor and turned it into a button that we can press to reset the entire game and take us back to the start menu, we want to do the exact same thing with the U1 actor. So we'll just move back here and double click on the U1 actor. We're going to create a new rule. And I'll switch this over to touch. And what we want to do is reset the game. So I'll drag the reset game behavior up to this rule, which says when we press this actor, we want to reset the whole game. So let's go ahead and preview everything that we have so far. We've already previewed the lose a few times, so let's see what happens now when we actually completely win this game. So we'll get rid of all the coins here quickly. And we've won. You can see that our ball isn't there anymore, our start button is removed, and we now have the U1 click to continue actor showing up. And if I click on that, it's going to take us back to the beginning of the game. I can click start again and play a whole new game.